Hi everyone, it's me, Krylios, Team Racing Productions MC and producer. And joining me today, I have Peter Bolton, who is running for Ward 2 City Council. Hello, Peter. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's definitely my pleasure. Let us begin with a little bit about your background and why you decided to run this year.
Well, I'm a complete political newcomer, never stood for public office or anything like that. I'm a journalist, writer by trade. I write about political issues, mostly international issues, but I've always followed closely what's going on here locally in DC. I've always voted for the Statehood Green Party candidates ever since I moved here back in 2010, because as far as I'm concerned, the Democratic Party is essentially a right-wing neoliberal pro-imperialism party, whereas the Green Party is anti-war, supports eco-socialism, real progressive reforms. Uh, I got into the race simply because I asked the party who their candidate for Ward 2 was, and they said they didn't have one. And they asked, would you like to be the candidate? And I said, sure, why not? If no one's stepping up to the plate, then I'd be happy to do so myself. And that's really where it started. And I officially launched my campaign in about halfway into September.
Halfway into September. Okay, great, great. Now tell me something. It's what are the biggest issues? What are the biggest issues that you would like to tackle if elected to if elected to the seat for Ward 2 for DC City Council?
Well, it's very difficult to narrow down. There are so many important issues. If I could maybe take three or four.
Oh, yeah, go ahead with three. Three is
Okay.
perfect.
All right. Well, first of all, I think that the ridiculous cost of housing in this city needs to be addressed. So I support making many of the temporary measures that were put in place as part of the response to COVID-19 to be made permanent. So I support permanent citywide rent control, rent cancellation in some cases, a moratorium on evictions and utilities shutoffs. So if I can take that as one, and I would describe that as a radical change in how housing is dealt with in this city. The second, which is something I feel very, very strongly about, is bringing utilities into public municipal ownership and delivering them to residents at cost. At the present time, we have this multinational corporation, or well, national corporation called Pepcon, I believe recently bought by a Chicago-based company called Exelon, which is privately owned and pays dividends to shareholders. And that money comes out of the pocket of the people who pay their gas and electricity bills. So essentially what you have is working and middle-class people lining the pockets of wealthy shareholders. It doesn't make any sense. So I would bring that completely into public ownership, send these usurers, these parasites back on the train to Chicago and deliver electricity, water, gas at cost, which means without anyone making any profit from it. The third, boy, there are so many. How do I choose the third?
Well, there, I've given you a list.
Yeah,
So you
all
can
right, you
choose
have my
one.
list. See, yeah, you have some of them here. Well, I was going to pick full public ownership, or abolishing fares on the WMATA system. But what I think is even more important is fighting for DC statehood, because the residents of Washington, D.C. have already expressed their preference in a ballot measure a few years ago, overwhelmingly in favor of statehood, and yet the federal government and the council have failed to deliver it. And I don't think that the Democrats really care that much about statehood in their heart of hearts. My party, on the other hand, traces its roots to Julius Hobson, to people who were fighting for statehood back in the 1970s, and then Hilda Mason, who was on the council during the 80s and 90s. So I believe in aggressive measures, no more Mr. Nice Guy when it comes to statehood. If the federal government are going to deny our rightful wish for statehood and full representation in the federal Congress, then we should start fighting back. If they're not going to be good guests, then we should be good hosts. So if I were on the council, I'd start advocating for measures like disallowing the federal government from hosting events at DC public schools, or even prohibiting them from using city amenities until they grant statehood. Apply the pressure, demand statehood. I hope it's to see it by 2025.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now tell me something. For you have been highly critical of your opponents, on social media and stuff like that. Tell
Yeah.
me why you are why you are the choice, why you are the man for the job, as opposed to your other candidates, your opponent, the other candidates that are.
Well, Brooke Pinto, who has very little political experience and very few roots in the DC community. She had never even voted in a DC election until this year. She then won the Democratic Party primary with less than 30% of the vote, only about 3,000 votes total, in a place which has almost 50,000 registered voters. That's Ward 2. And then she won the special election unopposed after her fellow Democrats suspended their campaign. So she doesn't really have much of a mandate to be representing the people of this ward, which of course is one of the most important places in the country, the heart of DC. Since she's been on the council, she's already shown herself to be largely a continuation of Jack Evans' tenure. She's voted against raising taxes on the wealthy. She's opposed rent cancellation, saying that renters and landlords, property owners as she calls them, are both hurting, and trying to draw some kind of equivalence. And my friend Pete Tucker has already uncovered potential family links to that well-known progressive Donald Trump and his Mar-a-Lago house in Palm Beach. So she doesn't have any progressive credentials, really. She doesn't have much of a mandate, and she has very few roots in the community. So when she was still up in Greenwich, Connecticut, sipping iced tea at some debutante ball, I was on the streets of this city, rain or shine, cardboard hand and sign, protesting and campaigning for issues like paid leave for the city's restaurant workers with groups like the Restaurant Organizing Committee and the Democratic Socialists of America, whose steering committee I've served on. As for these so-called independents, they're just Democrats who switched their party affiliation just for this race. So I see them as every bit as tainted as Brooke Pinto herself is by the Democratic Party, which has failed this city. It has become a Republican-light party that cozies up to investors, that cozies up to developers and other private interests and serves their interests and not the interests of ordinary working and middle class city residents. So my party, my candidacy, my campaign is offering a real radical alternative to shake things up and fight for the interests of the little people rather than the interests of the developers.
Wow, okay, noted. Now tell me something, now you're running a campaign during what's, a global pandemic. How has that been for you? And, what's that challenge been like? How have you had to adapt to do this campaign during a global pandemic?
Well, it's been extremely difficult because there's been an ongoing debate in my party about whether we should do canvassing. I haven't done any because I think that many people wouldn't feel comfortable with you knocking on their door and having close contact. And they have no idea how many doors you've knocked on before you knocked on theirs. So you could have just been in contact with someone with COVID-19 moments before you then talk to them. So canvassing has been out, but many of the things that have made my campaign difficult have always been problems for my party. We're at a huge disadvantage in terms of financial resources compared to our Democratic Party rivals. Brooke Pinto has over $150,000 to spend on her campaign. I have less than 2,000. So it's not, and that's why I'm in favor of publicly funded elections, because there's not a level playing field. And again, I make this point about the developers. They don't give that money to Democratic candidates out of the goodness of their hearts. They want something in return. So it's been very difficult for my campaign. I've been trying to utilize the tools that I have, social media. My party usually gets blacked out by the main media here in DC. We haven't got any coverage in the Washington Post, but to their lasting credit, some of the student publications, the GW Hatchet, the Georgetown, Hoya, and the AU, the Wash, have all given me some coverage, which I'd like to say I'm very appreciative of. So I'm making best as I can in very difficult circumstances.
Wonderful. And, you know, I will just say that here at Team Racing, we're so happy that we've been able to cover every single candidate, you know, who's accepted the call, that we've reached out, you know, from Democrats to independents to DC Green State parties. So we've, you know, really had the whole gamut of everyone that's been running in this city here on our platform.
And that's really to your credit.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it.
Definitely. Now, as we come down to the end, I want to, you know, tell our viewers how important it is to vote this year, why voting is so important this year, and why, you know, you are the one that they should vote for.
Well, there's this idea that sadly many people have these days, that all politicians are the same, that they're all corrupt, that they don't differ that much from one another. And my response is that's only true as long as we allow it to be true and we accept that premise. I'd like to make clear that the Democratic Party has failed this city. Gentrification has pushed out huge amount of people to neighboring jurisdictions. Many people are now spending almost or even more than 50% of their pay just to pay their rent. And there is an opportunity to vote for something different in this election. My party stands for real progress, unlike the Democratic Party. And this idea that voting for a third party is throwing away your vote, again, it's only true for as long as we all agree that it's true and people think that it's true. These are mind-forged manacles. Other parties in other countries that started off very small, the British Labour Party was a minor party in the early 20th century. By the middle of the century, it was a party of government. So I encourage people, go out, vote. Don't accept this flawed logic that you should vote for the lesser of two evils. The lesser of two evils is still evil. And by the way, if I can just give a plug to my party's presidential candidate, Howie Hawkins, he's suggesting all the things and more that Bernie Sanders was offering. He's a progressive on the ballot. And in DC, it's not a competitive district anyway. So if you're progressive, if you're radical, if you're a socialist, cast your vote for Howie Hawkins. If the Green Party candidate gets up to 5%, then they'll start taken notice of by the mainstream media. And the Democrats will get scared and we'll have to start listening to progressives. So yeah, my final word is go out, vote Statehood Green, and don't buy into this logic that a vote for a third party is a wasted vote.
Right. So right before we go, just if people wanted to support your campaign, if they wanted to keep up with you, if they wanted to follow you, how can they go about doing that?
Well, you can go to my website, which is Bolton for Ward 2, number 2.org, where you can learn about all of my policies. You can also go to my party's website here, dcstatehoodgreenparty.org/candidate/Peter Bolton. You can follow me on Twitter or Facebook. I'd appreciate any donation, no matter how small, can help me stand up and challenge Brooke Pinto and the so-called independents in this race. I also really encourage people to check out the other candidates' websites and compare them to mine. See where we differ. see the fact that I'm pushing for a city-based Medicare for all system, that I'm pushing for abolition of user fees on the entire metro system, and consider that these things are realistic. They're not only realistic, but they've been done in other countries and other cities, particularly in Europe. And if there's enough money, as Tony Benn said, if there's enough money to kill people in foreign wars, then there must be enough money to help people.
I think we can end it right there. I like that saying right there. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you, and I wish you the best of luck on your race.
Thank you. My pleasure. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Bye, everyone.